Okay, so picture this. You're strolling through a market in Morocco, right? And you want to buy some spices or maybe haggle for a cool souvenir. Or how about you're in a Parisian cafe trying to order that perfect cup of coffee?
Mhm.
You know, the one with all the fancy French names. Or, hey, maybe you've got a big presentation coming up for some international clients. And wouldn't it be amazing if you could just nail it in English? Confidently.
I mean, that's the dream for a lot of people, right? To be able to communicate freely without language getting in the way.
Yeah, it's like unlocking a whole new level in the game of life, don't you think? And get this, the source we're diving into today claims it can make learning English easy, fun, and super effective, no matter where you're starting from.
Easy, fun, and super effective. That's a pretty bold claim. I'm intrigued.
Right. So we all know that English is like kind of a big deal, right? But this source, it goes beyond the usual travel and jobs thing. They're saying that with over 1.5 billion people using English as a second language, it's basically the internet of languages.
The internet of languages, huh? I like that analogy. It really highlights how English connects people from all corners of the globe. It's like the common ground for a huge chunk of the planet.
Exactly. They even call it a lingua franca, which I guess means like a bridge language.
Yeah, exactly. A bridge language that helps people from totally different backgrounds and cultures communicate with each other. It's like having a universal translator right in your pocket.
Oh, that reminds me of this time I was trying to get directions in, like rural Japan.
How did that go?
Let's just say I ended up in a rice paddy instead of at a tea house. It was a bit of an adventure.
I bet.
But, you know, once I actually brushed up on my English a bit, it was so much easier to connect with locals and even other travelers.
I could totally see that. I mean, think about it. The source also mentions that, becoming fluent in English can open up so many doors, not just for travel, but for education, for your career. It's like expanding your horizons, you know?
Okay, but let's get real for a sec. Tons of people learn English the traditional way, right? Textbooks, classes, all that. But the source is claiming they've got the secret sauce for learning faster. And their first tip, daily practice. But they're not talking about hours and hours of studying. They're saying consistency is more important than intensity.
That's interesting. So instead of cramming for hours once a week, it's better to do a little bit each day.
Yeah, exactly. They even suggest setting a small, achievable goal, like learning maybe 5 new words every day, something you can actually stick with.
That makes sense. It's like building a muscle.
Yeah.
You wouldn't expect to become a weightlifter overnight by spending 5 hours at the gym once a month, right? You got to be consistent with it.
Totally. Okay, but their next tip kind of threw me for a loop. They say you should be thinking in English. Honestly, it sounds kind of like a Jedi mind trick, you know?
Thinking in English, at first it does sound a bit out there. But what they're really getting at is shifting your mental framework.
Oh, okay. I'm listening.
So instead of constantly translating back and forth between your native language and English, you try to actually form your thoughts directly in English, even for simple things.
Instead of thinking, I'm hungry, I should think I'm famished.
Well, you could get fancy with your vocabulary, sure. But even just everyday thoughts like, what am I going to have for dinner tonight? Or, man, I really need to go to the grocery store. Stuff like that.
So basically rewiring my brain to default to English.
Yeah, kinda.
Yeah.
And the more you do it, the easier it gets. Trust me.
Okay, interesting. So what's next on this fast track to fluency?
Well, building on that idea of immersing yourself in the language, the source talks about harnessing the power of movies, TV shows, podcasts, even YouTube videos. Basically, surrounding yourself with authentic English as much as possible.
Okay, I get that, but sometimes I feel like when I watch a movie and only understand half of what they're saying, it's kind of frustrating. I'm missing out on the jokes and the nuances and all that.
I know what you mean. But that's where the shift in focus comes in. Instead of getting hung up on understanding every single word, try to focus on the overall context, the storyline. And as you get more comfortable, gradually reduce your reliance on subtitles. Let your brain do the work.
It's like training your ear to actually decode the language, right?
Exactly. And I guess repeating phrases out loud can also help with pronunciation, even if it feels a bit silly at first.
Okay, that makes sense. So active engagement, not just passive listening. Got it. But what about the elephant in the room? The fear of actually speaking English. I used to totally freeze up every time I had to say something, terrified of making a mistake and sounding like a total fool.
Oh, tell me about it. That's a super common fear. And this source, they address it head on. They're saying that making mistakes, it's like an inevitable part of the learning process.
So, like, it's okay to mess up.
Exactly. It's like learning to ride a bike.
Yeah.
You're going to fall a few times before you find your balance.
So how do we get over that hump? Like, is there some kind of magic confidence potion we can just chug?
Oh man, if only it were that easy, right? But the source does have some pretty practical advice. They talk about the importance of, finding a safe and supportive environment to practice in, like maybe joining a language exchange group or finding a language partner.
Yeah, I've heard those. And there are all those apps now too, right? Where you can connect with native speakers from all over the world. That sounds a lot less intimidating than trying to strike up a conversation with some random stranger in a cafe.
Totally. And a lot of these apps, like, I think there's one called Hello Talk. They have built-in features for correcting each other's pronunciation and grammar. It's like having a personal language coach right there in your pocket.
Wow, that's pretty cool. But speaking of technology, we can't forget about all those language learning apps that have become so popular. Do those actually work, or are they just like glorified vocabulary flashcards?
Well, like any tool, I guess it depends how you use it, right? The source does mention that apps like Duolingo, Babbel, Memrise, these can be really effective for building a foundation in grammar and vocabulary, especially for those like bite-sized learning moments, like during your commute or while you're waiting in line for something.
Okay, but do they actually help you like speak the language? I've tried a few of those apps before, and I always felt like I was just memorizing words and phrases, but I didn't really know how to use them in real conversations.
That's a good point. And that's why the source stresses that it's important to choose apps that have speaking exercises and they give you practice with pronunciation. Some even use, like AI-powered speech recognition, to give you feedback on your accent and fluency.
Whoa, that's wild. Technology is really changing the game, isn't it?
It really is. But even with all the apps and all the best tips in the world, there are some mistakes that seem like everyone makes. Like, I still mix up my tenses sometimes, especially when I'm trying to speak spontaneously.
Oh my gosh, tenses. Don't even get me started. That's like my biggest struggle.
I hear our tense confusion is definitely a common stumbling block. And the source actually goes into some strategies for dealing with it. One of the key things they emphasize is like paying attention to the time markers in a sentence.
So instead of just blurting out, I go to the store yesterday, I need to stop and think, okay, this happened in the past, so I need to use the past tense. I went to the store yesterday.
You got it. And another common mistake they point out is misusing pronouns, especially I and me.
Oh, I totally do that. Like, I'll catch myself saying, me and my friend went to the movies when it should be my friend and I. It's like such a small thing, but it makes a difference.
Right. And as the source points out, all these little errors, they could really add up and make your English sound less polished. And another common pitfall is relying too much on simple vocabulary.
So, like, instead of always saying good or bad, I should try to use more interesting words like fantastic, terrible, mind-blowing,
Exactly. It's about pushing yourself to expand your vocabulary and use more descriptive language. And they have a really simple but effective suggestion for dealing with all these common errors. Ready for it?
Hit me with it.
Practice, practice, practice. They really emphasize the importance of actively using the language, getting feedback from others, and not being afraid to correct yourself.
It's like anything. The more you do it, the better you get. But I gotta be honest, sometimes learning a language can feel like such a chore. Is there a way to make it more, fun?
Oh, absolutely. The source actually dedicates a whole section to this. They're basically saying that language learning doesn't have to be all drills and textbooks. There are tons of ways to make it more enjoyable.
Okay, now you're talking. What are some of their suggestions?
Well, they talk about like incorporating activities that you already enjoy into your language learning routine. Things like playing language games or belting out your favorite English tunes at karaoke night. Or even keeping a daily journal in English.
Wait, journaling in English, isn't that like a little intimidating? I feel like my inner critic would have a field day.
It might feel awkward at first, but they argue that journaling can actually be a really powerful tool for practicing your writing skills.
Yeah.
And just expressing yourself more freely. Plus, you don't have to show it to anyone if you don't want to.
So it's like a judgment-free zone for playing around with the language. Okay, I can get on board with that.
Exactly. And they also suggest like engaging with online communities that are related to your interests, but in English, of course. It's a natural way to immerse yourself and connect with people from all over the world who share your passions.
That sounds way more appealing than staring at flashcards. I love the idea of turning language learning into an adventure instead of a chore.
That's what it's all about. They really stress that enjoying the process is key to staying motivated and making real, lasting progress. It's about finding those moments that make you fall in love with the language.
So, ditch the boring textbooks and embrace the fun stuff. I can definitely get behind that. It's funny, isn't it, how we tend to approach language learning like it's this super serious academic thing.
Yeah, like it's all about memorizing grammar rules and passing tests.
Exactly. But this source, they're kind of making me see it in a whole new light. Maybe it's more about, like, embracing the playfulness of language, having fun with it.
I think that's a really great point. They definitely emphasize that motivation and enjoyment are like essential ingredients for success in the long run. I mean, if you dread studying, you're probably not going to stick with it.
It's true. It's like forcing yourself to eat broccoli when all you really want is pizza. You might do it for a while, but eventually you're going to give in.
Uh-huh, exactly. And this source, they're all about making language learning more like pizza, something you actually crave and look forward to.
Okay, I'm sold.
Yeah.
So how do we make those aha moments a regular thing? I'm ready for some actionable takeaways here.
Well, one thing they suggest is weaving English into the fabric of your daily life. Instead of treating it as a separate chore, what if you just looked for opportunities to engage with the language naturally throughout your day?
I see what you mean. It's like that saying, the best exercise is the one you'll actually do. So instead of feeling pressured to study, we can just incorporate English into things we already enjoy.
Precisely. Think about your daily routine. Could you listen to an English podcast during your commute? Watch a movie with subtitles?
Yeah.
Even try thinking in English for a few minutes each day while you're doing, like, mundane tasks?
I've actually started listening to an English news podcast while I walk my dog in the morning.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's a great way to multitask and stay informed. Plus, my dog doesn't judge my pronunciation.
Uh-huh, that's a bonus. But seriously, think about all the other possibilities. You could read articles online, try recipes from English cookbooks, join an online forum related to your hobbies.
It's about turning language learning from a chore into a lifestyle.
Exactly. An ongoing exploration that can really enrich your life in so many ways.
This whole deep dive has honestly shifted my perspective. I used to get so caught up in making mistakes and feeling like I wasn't progressing fast enough.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into that trap of comparison, especially these days when it seems like everyone is, achieving fluency overnight.
Right. But this source reminds us that it's a journey, not a race.
And like any good journey, it's about savoring the experience, even those unexpected detours.
Exactly. Embrace the stumbles, the fumbles, the awkward silences. It's all part of the process.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. Remember that you're not alone on this journey. There's a whole community of language learners out there.
And the most important thing is to find what works best for you. Whether it's those bite-sized app lessons, immersing yourself in movies and music, or just challenging yourself to think in English a little bit every day.
Keep experimenting, stay curious, and most importantly, have fun. Who knows, maybe you'll even inspire someone else to embark on their own language learning adventure.